On the night of our anniversary, my father-in-law humiliated me again and again in front of hundreds of guests. I tried to ignore him. I tried to remain calm, but when I finally answered back, my husband stepped toward me and slapped me across the face in front of 600 people. The room erupted in laughter. I wiped the tears from my eyes, turned away from them, and made one phone call. "Dad, please come." Before I continue, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and please like this video and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to relatives who treated you as though you had no value. My name is Claire, and I am 34 years old. For the past 10 years, I have worked as a consultant specializing in historic real estate. It is a quiet profession that requires patience, careful attention, and genuine respect for the past. I have always preferred simple clothing, peaceful surroundings, and a private life. My husband was the complete opposite. His name was Ethan, and he was 36 years old. He served as vice president of his father's wealth management company. Ethan loved attention. He enjoyed expensive tailored suits, luxury vehicles, exclusive social circles, and the constant approval of people he considered important. That night was the most significant event on his social calendar. We were attending the 10th anniversary gala for his father's investment fund, held at the most prestigious country club in the state. The grand ballroom glittered beneath rows of crystal chandeliers. Massive floral arrangements towered over the tables. Servers in spotless white tuxedos moved through the crowd carrying silver trays filled with champagne. 600 of the city's most powerful people had been invited. Politicians, corporate executives, local celebrities, influential business owners. Nearly everyone who mattered in their world was there. I stood near the main dining table, quietly holding a glass of sparkling water. I wore a simple navy blue evening gown that I had purchased straight from a store rack. It was elegant, understated, and comfortable. I felt perfectly fine until I looked across the ballroom at my husband's family. My mother-in-law, Vivian, stood near the center of the room, surrounded by a circle of admirers. Her custom-made designer gown had probably cost more than my first car. A heavy diamond necklace rested against her throat. Beside her stood my sister-in-law, Olivia, covered in an excessive amount of expensive jewelry. Olivia was accompanied by her husband, Marcus. Marcus was a highly successful African-American corporate attorney who handled the complicated legal affairs of my father-in-law's company. He stood beside his wife with a glass of premium bourbon in his hand, silently evaluating every conversation and every person in the room. I tried to make myself as unnoticeable as possible. All I wanted was to survive the evening without becoming the target of another family attack. But in that family, my presence alone was treated like an insult. My father-in-law, Charles, stepped onto the stage and approached the main podium. The string quartet immediately stopped playing. Conversation faded across the enormous ballroom. Charles lifted his crystal champagne flute and tapped it with a silver spoon. The clear, ringing sound commanded the attention of all 600 guests. He looked over the audience with his shoulders raised and his chest filled with pride. "Thank you all for joining us as we celebrate 10 years of extraordinary growth and prosperity," he began. His amplified voice carried through every corner of the ballroom. "We built this firm on a foundation of excellence. In our world, success does not happen by chance. It is created through breeding, discipline, and an uncompromising dedication to legacy. Our family understands the importance of maintaining a superior bloodline. We do more than manage wealth. We protect a standard of greatness that separates exceptional people from the ordinary." The audience responded with quiet murmurs of approval. I lowered my eyes and stared into my glass of water, hoping he would move on and begin thanking his employees and business partners. Instead, Charles turned toward our table. His eyes locked directly onto mine. A cold, deliberate smile appeared on his face. Of course, preserving a legacy like ours also requires a certain degree of generosity, he continued. His voice shifted into a mocking, theatrical tone. We must never forget our responsibility to help those who are less fortunate. My son Ethan has always taken our charitable mission very seriously. In fact, his commitment to charity is so remarkable that he brought it directly into our family home. Several guests gave uncertain laughs. They still did not fully understand what he was suggesting. Charles raised his glass and pointed it toward me. 10 years ago, Ethan could have chosen a wife from any of the distinguished families gathered in this room tonight. But instead, Charles continued, he chose to lift a woman who came from absolutely nothing. A woman who spends her days crawling through old houses, digging through dust and decay, pretending it's a respectable profession. He gave her his name. He gave her a life she never could have imagined. He gave her a seat at this table. It takes an extraordinarily generous man to overlook such an obvious lack of pedigree and spend years trying to polish an ordinary stone, hoping one day it might resemble a diamond. He lifted his champagne glass with a satisfied smile. So tonight, let us all raise a toast to Ethan and his unwavering dedication to charity. His words lingered in the air like poison. I couldn't move. The humiliation hit me so hard, it felt as though someone had placed a massive weight across my chest. I looked around the ballroom, hoping at least one person would recognize how cruel and inappropriate this was. I found no sympathy, only laughter. The ballroom erupted. Hundreds of well-dressed guests laughed openly. Some smiled politely. Others whispered to the people beside them. To them, I wasn't a human being. I was entertainment. My eyes found Vivian. She didn't even try to hide her amusement. She lifted her crystal wine glass to her lips, smiling behind it. Olivia laughed loudly, leaning against Marcus. Marcus simply shook his head before taking another slow sip of his bourbon, his expression completely untouched by compassion. My last hope was Ethan. I turned toward my husband, the man who had promised 10 years earlier that he would always stand beside me. I waited for him to walk onto the stage, to take the microphone away from his father, to tell everyone that enough was enough, to defend his wife, to prove that our marriage meant more to him than winning his father's approval. But he never moved. He wasn't angry. He wasn't embarrassed. He looked toward his father, then toward the laughing audience, and he smiled. Slowly, Ethan raised his champagne glass. He turned toward Charles and gently clinked his glass against his father's. The applause grew even louder. That tiny sound, crystal touching crystal, destroyed something inside me forever. At that moment, I realized I wasn't standing beside my husband. I was standing beside the person who had betrayed me more completely than anyone else ever could. The laughter continued rolling through the ballroom beneath the vaulted ceiling. I remained perfectly still. Once, I would have cried. Tonight, something inside me changed. 10 years of love, 10 years of loyalty, 10 years of making excuses for him. All of it disappeared in a single heartbeat. The warmth I'd carried for our marriage was gone. Only cold, undeniable clarity remained. I looked at Ethan standing proudly beside his father, and for the first time since I'd met him, I felt absolutely nothing. Near the orchestra stood a silver microphone on a sleek stand. I didn't run. I didn't argue. I didn't shed another tear. Instead, I walked toward it, slowly, calmly. The hem of my navy blue gown brushed softly across the polished marble floor. Guests watched with growing curiosity. Most expected me to leave in humiliation. Vivian nudged Olivia with her elbow and pointed in my direction. Both of them waited eagerly for my final collapse. I reached the microphone, wrapped my hand around the cool metal. Its steady weight somehow grounded me. I tapped it twice. Tap, tap. The sharp sound echoed across the ballroom, instantly cutting through the laughter. Every conversation stopped. 600 faces turned toward me. Charles frowned. Ethan lowered his champagne flute, confusion spreading across his face. I inhaled slowly. When I spoke, my voice was steady enough to fill every corner of the ballroom. "Thank you, Charles," I said politely. That was certainly an unforgettable toast. A few uneasy smiles appeared. It is true. My background is very different from yours. I spend my days inspecting aging buildings. I look for hidden decay. I identify weak foundations before they collapse. I help preserve things that other people have already given up on. I paused. Not a single person spoke. Then I looked directly at Charles. His confident smile began to fade. And speaking of structures that are close to collapsing, I think it's only fair that everyone here understands just how generous my own charity has been toward this family. Several guests exchanged confused glances. My little renovation company, the one you've spent years mocking, it had an exceptionally successful month. So successful that I was personally able to transfer $200,000 into Ethan's primary trading account. A stunned gasp swept through the ballroom. I never looked away from Charles. Yes, $200,000. My so-called dirty renovation money arrived just in time to cover an enormous margin call. It appears that your superior bloodline was less than 48 hours away from defaulting on a highly leveraged commercial real estate position. The silence that followed was unlike anything I had ever experienced. No music, no laughter, no applause. Only silence. Then, the whispers began. Quiet at first, then louder. They spread from one table to another like wildfire. Investors leaned toward each other. Executives exchanged worried looks. People who had trusted Charles with millions of dollars suddenly stared at him with unmistakable suspicion. Charles remained frozen behind the podium. Every trace of color disappeared from his face. His mouth hung slightly open. The confidence that had filled the room only moments earlier was gone. Vivian's crystal glass slipped from her fingers. It shattered across the marble floor. She didn't even notice. Her horrified stare remained fixed on Charles as the social status she valued above everything else began to crumble. Olivia covered her mouth with both hands, looking back and forth between me and her father. Marcus, however, reacted differently. He didn't panic. He didn't speak. He simply narrowed his eyes and studied me. His legal mind was already racing through every possible consequence. Unlike everyone else, he immediately understood what my words meant. The quiet daughter-in-law they had spent years ridiculing knew far more about the family's financial reality than anyone had ever imagined. At that moment, I was no longer their embarrassment. I had become the greatest threat their empire had ever faced. Finally, I looked at Ethan. He stood completely still. His hands were trembling. The confident image he had spent years building had just begun to collapse before the eyes of 600 witnesses. For a man who measured his worth by the approval of society's elite, there could have been no greater humiliation. Every influential person he had spent years trying to impress had just learned the truth. The successful executive they admired had been rescued by the very wife they had spent the evening Miss Khan mocking. The expressions around the ballroom changed instantly. Respect disappeared. Pity replaced it. Then came something even worse: contempt. Ethan's face turned a deep crimson. The muscles in his jaw tightened. The veins along his neck pushed visibly against the collar of his tailored silk shirt. His champagne flute slipped from his hand and shattered across the marble floor. "Shut your mouth!" His voice cracked with uncontrolled rage. Before anyone could react, he charged straight toward me. Guests hurried out of his path. Chairs scraped loudly across the marble as people scrambled backward. I didn't move. I remained exactly where I was, the microphone still in my hand. I refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing fear. He reaches me within seconds. For a brief moment, I thought he was going to snatch away the microphone, maybe scream at me, maybe drag me off the stage. I never imagined what happened next. Without saying another word, he swung his arm with all the strength he had. Crack! His open hand slammed across the left side of my face. The sound echoed through the silent ballroom. For an instant, everything went white. Pain exploded through my jaw. The taste of blood instantly filled my mouth. The force of the slap lifted me off balance. I stumbled backward helplessly. Directly behind me stood an enormous 10-tier champagne tower sparkling beneath the ballroom lights. My body crashed into it. The display collapsed instantly. Hundreds of crystal glasses shattered in every direction. Champagne burst across the polished marble floor like a wave. Broken glass rained down around me. I hit the floor hard, surrounded by shattered crystal and the remains of what had been their perfect celebration. Tiny fragments sliced through the fabric of my gown. Cold champagne soaked my clothes. Blood mixed with the expensive vintage wine spreading across the floor. For a single moment, I simply lay there staring up at the magnificent ceiling. The ballroom was silent. Not one person stepped forward. 600 distinguished guests watched me bleed. Slowly, I pushed myself onto my hands and knees. Sharp pieces of crystal dug into my palms. I ignored them. The ringing in my ears hadn't faded, but my vision was perfectly clear. I looked toward the front tables. Olivia stood there with one hand covering her mouth. A quiet laugh escaped anyway. She genuinely found my humiliation amusing. Beside her, Marcus remained perfectly composed. He neither smiled nor looked disturbed. He simply lifted his bourbon glass, took another slow sip, and watched everything unfold with cold professional detachment. Even now, his legal mind was already calculating the consequences. I forced myself to my feet. Champagne dripped from the torn fabric of my dress. Blood trickled from my split lip. Using the back of my hands, I quietly wiped it away. I didn't rush. I bent down, picked the microphone up from the wreckage, looked Ethan directly in the eyes, and saw it. He wasn't powerful anymore. He wasn't confident. His fists were clenched. His breathing was uneven. But behind all that anger, there was fear. Real fear. Without saying a single word, I released the microphone. It struck the marble floor. The screeching burst of feedback echoed throughout the ballroom. Then, I turned around and walked away. My head remained high. As I crossed the ballroom, every guest instinctively stepped aside. No one blocked my path. No one laughed anymore. The enormous wooden doors closed quietly behind me, shutting out the whispers that continued inside. The corridor beyond the ballroom was completely empty. I walked alone beneath crystal chandeliers, past gilded mirrors and priceless oil paintings. Behind me, a trail of wet footprints marked every step. The side of my face throbbed with pain. My cheek burned more intensely with every passing second. Still, I refused to acknowledge it. I reached the ladies' restroom and pushed open the heavy door. Inside, everything was immaculate. White marble, gold fixtures, perfect silence. I walked directly to the vanity, placed both hands on the edge of the sink, and looked at my reflection. A dark bruise had already begun spreading across my cheekbone. My lower lip was swollen and split. My carefully styled hair hung in damp strands against my shoulders. The woman staring back at me looked like a victim. But that's not what I felt. I felt free. For 10 years, I had played the role they expected, the quiet wife, the patient daughter-in-law, the woman who smiled politely while swallowing every insult. I had hidden my true identity because I wanted someone to love me for who I was, not because of the family I came from. Tonight, Ethan proved that my experiment had failed. He never loved me. He loved believing he controlled me. Slowly, I reached into the concealed pocket sewn inside my evening gown. I pulled out my phone. The screen was cracked from the fall, but it still worked. I unlocked it, opened my contacts, and my thumb stopped on one familiar name. I scrolled past the numbers for decorators, contractors, historic preservation officials, then past Ethan, Vivian, Olivia. Finally, my thumb stopped. It rested on a phone number I hadn't called in 10 years. The number belonged to a man whose name alone commanded respect and fear throughout the highest levels of international finance. For several seconds, I couldn't move. Making that call meant the end of the quiet life I had chosen. It meant destroying the carefully constructed world Ethan and his family believed was untouchable. It meant returning to an empire I had willingly left behind a decade earlier. I looked at my reflection one last time. The bruise, the blood, the woman staring back at me. Then, I pressed call. The phone rang only once. There was no assistant, no secretary, no screening. A deep, commanding voice answered immediately. The voice of a man accustomed to making decisions that moved billions of dollars. He spoke only one word. Claire. I closed my eyes. 10 years of silence disappeared in an instant. I didn't tell him about the gala. I didn't describe the humiliation. I didn't mention the slap. I simply whispered 3 words. Dad, please come. The call ended. He asked nothing. He didn't need an explanation. The Harrison Group had always operated with absolute speed and precision, and my father had built that reputation himself. I slowly lowered the phone onto the marble counter. Turning on the gold faucet, I splashed icy water across my face. The cold burned against my split lip, pulling me back into the present. I reached for a thick white towel and gently dried my face and arms. Halfway down my forearm, the fabric caught on something sharp. A tiny shard of crystal was still embedded beneath my skin. Without hesitation, I pulled it free and dropped it into the sink. It landed with a soft metallic click. I wasn't the helpless woman Charles had mocked. I wasn't the charity case Ethan believed he had rescued. I was the daughter of a man whose influence reached far beyond anything the Caldwell family could imagine. Just then, my cracked phone vibrated loudly across the marble countertop. The screen lit up. A message from Ethan. I opened it. "Don't bother coming back to my house. You're getting nothing. Marcus is already preparing the divorce papers." I read the message twice, carefully. I wanted to remember every single word. He still believed he was in control. He still believed he held every advantage. Quietly, I locked the screen and slipped the phone back into my dress. The game had changed. Only Ethan didn't know it yet. A few minutes later, I left the country club through the service entrance, avoiding the waiting valet attendants. My soaked evening gown clung to my skin. The cool night air stung the bruise spreading across my cheek. I hailed a passing taxi. Sliding into the back seat, I quietly gave the driver the address of the home Ethan and I had shared for the past 10 years. The house was a magnificent late 19th century estate. Ironically, I knew every inch of it. I had personally spent 3 years restoring its original mahogany woodwork, repairing its slate roof, and preserving the architectural details everyone admired. When the taxi drove away, I stood alone on the spotless brick driveway. I climbed the front steps, entered the familiar 6-digit security code. A bright red light flashed. Access denied. I tried again. Another red light. Another sharp electronic beep. Marcus had moved quickly. The moment Ethan sent that text, the locks had almost certainly been reprogrammed. They intended to keep me outside, away from my passport, away from my financial records, away from everything that belonged to me. They expected me to stand on the porch all night with nowhere to go. They forgot one important fact. I knew that house better than anyone, because I had restored it. Instead of trying the front entrance again, I walked quietly along the narrow stone path beside the house, past the trimmed hedges, past the wrought iron fence, toward the rear garden where the foundation disappeared beneath the slope. The shadows were deeper there. Almost no one ever went near that side of the property. Years earlier, while overseeing foundation repairs, I had insisted on preserving an old coal chute window beside the basement utility room. Ethan wanted it permanently sealed. I convinced the contractors to reinforce it instead. They never realized I had requested a concealed emergency release mechanism. If you knew exactly where to press, the latch could still be opened. I knelt in the damp soil, ruining what remained of my evening gown. Reaching beneath the cast iron grate, my fingers searched until they found the hidden steel lever. I pushed upward, leaning my weight against the frame. The old hinges groaned softly, then gave way. The narrow window swung inward. Beyond it, only darkness. I slipped inside, dropped silently onto the concrete basement floor. I didn't need a flashlight. I remembered every corner, every hallway, every support beam. I walked past the wine cellar, past the climate control equipment, until I reached the main staircase. Slowly, silently, I climbed toward the first floor. The house was empty, yet somehow, it no longer felt like home. Without hesitation, I headed upstairs, straight toward the master bedroom. I didn't need much: my passport, my encrypted hard drive, a few essentials, nothing more. Before my father arrived, I wanted to be gone. I pushed open the heavy double doors leading into the master suite. Moonlight filtered softly through the sheer curtains. Then I saw them. 6 large industrial trash bags lined the far wall. They were stuffed full and carelessly tied shut. One of the bags had split open. Part of one of my silk blouses hung over the edge. Nearby lay my tailored work pants. My favorite cashmere sweaters had been shoved inside the garbage bags as though they were worthless trash. Ethan hadn't packed my belongings. He had thrown them away. He wanted every trace of me erased from the house as quickly as possible. Oddly enough, I didn't feel sadness, only a cold, detached anger. I walked over, knelt beside the nearest bag, and pulled out a pair of jeans and a dark cashmere turtleneck. I wasn't staying another minute in the blood-stained gown I was wearing. As I lifted the sweater from the bag, my eyes drifted toward our bed. The duvet had been folded back. Something bright caught my attention. A piece of crimson lace rested casually on the white sheets. I froze. Slowly, I walked closer. It wasn't mine. I knew every piece of clothing I owned. I'd never seen it before. I stared at the delicate red fabric lying on the bed where I had slept for the past 10 years. Everything suddenly became painfully clear. Ethan wasn't only a failed businessman. He wasn't only an abusive husband. He had been unfaithful. Inside our home. Inside the bedroom I had lovingly restored. While I was working to save his family's financial disaster, another woman had been sleeping in my bed. I picked up the lace garment between 2 fingers. It felt cheap, disposable, just like the excuses he would eventually try to invent. I understood then why he wanted me gone tonight. It wasn't only because I had embarrassed his father. He intended to bring her back here. I quietly dropped the lingerie onto the bed. Without another thought, I removed my torn evening gown and stepped out of it. The silk pooled around my feet. I changed into my jeans and warm cashmere sweater. For the first time all night, I felt comfortable. Inside the walk-in closet, a concealed panel hid my private safe. I opened it using my biometric access code. Inside were the only things I truly cared about: my passport, an encrypted hard drive containing every record of my independent business, a few confidential documents. I packed everything into a leather duffel bag, slung it over my shoulder. I was ready to leave forever. Then, a loud metallic sound echoed from downstairs. The electronic deadbolt disengaged. A second later, the heavy front door slammed against the wall. Someone had come home. I froze, standing perfectly still inside the dark closet. Footsteps echoed through the marble foyer. 2 men, walking confidently, as though they owned the entire world. Then I heard Ethan laughing. It wasn't relief. It wasn't happiness. It was cruel, satisfied. He wasn't alone. Marcus was with him. His deep voice carried clearly through the house. As they walked, Marcus calmly explained the legal strategy he intended to begin first thing the following morning. He discussed freezing my bank accounts, preventing me from accessing marital assets, making sure I left the marriage with nothing but the clothes I was wearing. Their footsteps reached the staircase, then climbed higher, straight toward the master bedroom. Neither of them had any idea that I was already inside, waiting. I remained perfectly still until they crossed the bedroom doorway. The overhead lights snapped on. Moonlight disappeared. Ethan's eyes immediately landed on my ruined evening gown lying on the floor. His expression hardened. He knew at once that I had found another way into the house. Before either man could search the room, I stepped out of the shadows, calmly, without fear. Wearing only my jeans and dark sweater, I walked into the center of the bedroom. The contrast between my simple clothes and the glamorous gala from only an hour earlier couldn't have been greater. Ethan glared at me. His jaw tightened. The bruise spreading across my cheek stood as a perfect reminder of the slap he had given me. "You've always been impossible," he sneered. Stepping aside, he allowed Marcus to enter first. Marcus walked in with the confidence of someone who believed every situation could be controlled. His charcoal suit looked immaculate. His expression remained cold, unreadable. In one hand, he carried a thick leather portfolio. Without greeting me, without even acknowledging my presence, he crossed the room and dropped the heavy folder onto the bed. It landed beside the crimson lace lingerie. Marcus adjusted his cufflinks before finally looking at me. "We're going to keep this simple, Claire." His voice echoed calmly through the room. "You humiliated Charles tonight. You jeopardized confidence in the family investment fund. As of this moment, your place in this family is over." He tapped the folder. "Inside are your divorce documents. That's the title you'll read, but in reality, it's a carefully prepared postnuptial agreement designed to protect Ethan from your recent instability." I looked down at the stack of papers, then back at Marcus. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I simply asked one question. "How exactly do you intend to enforce an agreement that never existed until tonight?" Marcus smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. It was the expression of a predator convinced victory was inevitable. He rested one hand on the leather folder. "You made one very expensive mistake, Claire. You deposited the profits from your business into your marital accounts. For the last 18 months, I've served as Ethan's fiduciary attorney. I created a network of shell companies disguised as commercial real estate investments. Every payment your restoration business earned, every transfer you deposited, was quietly redirected into those entities. From there, a series of strategic internal loans intentionally defaulted. The money never disappeared. It was legally restructured and transferred into an irrevocable offshore trust in the Cayman Islands." For a brief moment, I simply stared at him. They hadn't just planned a divorce. They had been stealing from me, methodically, for more than a year. I looked directly into Marcus's eyes. "And who," I asked quietly, "is the beneficiary of that trust?" Without the slightest hesitation, he answered, "Olivia. My wife is the sole beneficiary. Your savings, your company profits, every asset you brought into this marriage, legally belongs to her now. The accounts are fully protected by international privacy laws. You have no claim, no access, no money. You're bankrupt, Claire." Ethan burst into laughter. He reached over to the bed, picked up the crimson lace lingerie, and casually tossed it onto the floor. Ethan laughed bitterly. "You actually thought you could walk into our gala and threaten my father?" His eyes burned with vindictive satisfaction. "You really believed wiring $200,000 made you powerful? You're nothing more than a glorified construction worker. We took your money because you were too naive to notice. Now look at you. You have no family standing behind you. no savings to hire an attorney. And by the end of tonight, you won't even have a place to sleep. I tightened my grip on the leather duffel bag. Their entire strategy was painfully obvious: shock, financial ruin, isolation. They believed I was an ordinary working woman with no resources and nowhere to turn. They expected me to collapse under the pressure. Marcus calmly reached inside his tailored jacket. He removed a polished silver pen. Click. The sharp metallic sound echoed through the bedroom. Holding the pen between two fingers, he extended it toward me. "You have two options," he said. His voice remained low and controlled. "You can sign the final page. If you do, you waive every claim to spousal support. You permanently surrender any right to recover the transferred funds. In return, Ethan is generously offering you a relocation payment of $5,000. Enough to rent a cheap apartment. Enough to start over, somewhere no one knows your name. Take the money. Leave tonight." I looked directly at him. "And the second option?" Marcus stepped closer. The silver pen stopped only inches from my bruised face. "If you refuse, I'll bury you in litigation. I'll make sure every dollar you ever earn is garnished. You'll spend decades paying legal fees. You'll still be paying my invoices when you're 70 years old." I never reached for the pen. Instead, I picked up the thick leather folder. The expensive paper felt heavy in my hands. I slowly opened it, then began reading. Page after page, clause after clause. Marcus hadn't prepared divorce papers. He had prepared a weapon. There were financial waivers, a permanent non-disclosure agreement preventing me from ever discussing the family or their business, a sweeping non-compete clause that would effectively destroy my historic preservation career by preventing me from working within 500 miles. And on the final page, a prepared statement declaring that the marriage had ended because of my own emotional instability. They intended to take everything: my money, my reputation, my career, my voice, even my sanity. I reached the final page, looked at the blank signature line, then quietly closed the folder. Ethan smiled confidently. Marcus waited in complete silence. Both men expected tears. They expected pleading. They expected surrender. Instead, I looked Marcus directly in the eyes, placed both hands on the folder, tightened my grip, and pulled. Rip! The sound of thick paper tearing filled the bedroom. Without hesitation, I ripped the entire agreement cleanly in half. Then, I dropped both halves. They landed directly on top of Marcus's polished Italian shoes. For the first time that evening, his expression changed. Only slightly, but enough. Without another word, I turned away, walked back to the corner of the room, lifted my leather duffel bag, slung it over my shoulder. Inside were my passport, my encrypted hard drive, everything I truly needed, everything capable of destroying them. Ethan looked down at the shredded documents, then burst into mocking laughter. "You've completely lost your mind, Claire. You think tearing up paper changes reality? You have nothing. No family, no trust fund, no rich father coming to save you. We found you with nothing. And that's exactly where you're going back." He stepped closer. His voice grew louder with every sentence. "I gave you everything. I gave you my name, my home, my life. And now you're going right back to the gutter. So tell me, where exactly are you planning to go tonight? Your accounts are frozen. Your credit cards won't work. You can't pay for a hotel. You probably can't even afford a taxi. By midnight, you'll be sleeping on wet concrete. Marcus folded his arms. You made a terrible calculation, Claire. The originals are already saved digitally. I'll file them first thing tomorrow morning. You'll be buried under lawsuits. You'll never work in this state again. You should have accepted the $5,000. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Men who believed they had already won rarely listened anyway. I simply adjusted the strap of my duffel bag, then walked toward the bedroom door. Ethan stepped directly into my path. His face twisted with rage. He grabbed my upper arm. His fingers dug painfully into my skin. Get out. He shoved me toward the hallway. Get out of my house! I caught myself before falling, then quietly walked toward the staircase. Behind me, Ethan followed. When I reached the foyer, he shoved me again. Marcus descended the stairs at a slower pace, watching everything with detached satisfaction. Ethan stormed to the front door. He threw it open. A violent storm had rolled in while we were upstairs. Wind roared through the entrance. Freezing rain blew across the marble floor. Lightning flashed over the dark estate grounds. The temperature had dropped dramatically. Without warning, Ethan shoved me one last time. I stumbled through the doorway onto the rain-soaked stone porch. Cold rain drenched my sweater within seconds. Water streamed down my face, mixing with the bruise and dried blood from earlier. Slowly, I turned back to face my husband. Ethan stood comfortably inside the warm foyer. A cruel smile spread across his face. "Welcome back to the real world," he called over the roar of the storm. "Enjoy your life back in the gutter, Claire." Without another word, he grabbed the heavy brass handle. Bang! The massive oak door slammed shut. A second later, the deadbolt locked with a loud, metallic click. I was alone, outside, in the freezing rain. Slowly, I walked down the stone steps and onto the rain-soaked brick driveway. Water poured over my face. My hair clung to the bruise on my cheek. The wind cut through my sweater until I could feel it in my bones. Still, I refused to shiver. I stood alone beside the empty street, my leather duffel bag hanging from my shoulder. The entire neighborhood was silent. Only the rain, only the wind, only distant thunder rolling across the sky. Inside the house, Ethan and Marcus were probably pouring themselves another glass of bourbon, celebrating what they believed was my complete destruction. I stared into the darkness ahead. Then, a blinding burst of white light pierced the storm. Powerful LED headlights sliced through the curtain of rain. At first, I thought it was a single vehicle. Then another appeared, and another. 3 identical black Cadillac Escalades emerged from the darkness. They moved with perfect precision. The convoy glided silently through the upscale neighborhood. Their tires hissed across the flooded pavement. Without a single wasted movement, all 3 SUVs stopped directly in front of me. The engines continued idling with a deep, controlled rumble. Rain hammered against the black-tinted windows. No one stepped out. Not yet. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't someone who had taken a wrong turn. Everything about their arrival had been carefully timed. Behind me, the front door opened again. Ethan and Marcus stepped onto the covered porch. The headlights had drawn their attention. They had probably expected to see me walking away, or standing in the rain, broken and helpless. Instead, they found me standing in front of a motorcade worth more than most people would earn in a lifetime. Even through the storm, I heard Ethan laugh. He assumed it had to be some kind of mistake, perhaps an executive convoy passing through the neighborhood. He leaned casually against one of the brick columns, folding his arms across his chest. Marcus remained beside him. Unlike Ethan, he wasn't smiling. His sharp eyes stayed fixed on the vehicles. His instincts were already telling him something wasn't right. Then, the rear passenger door of the lead Escalade opened. A tall man wearing a perfectly tailored black suit stepped out. The rain didn't seem to affect him. He calmly opened a large black umbrella, holding it with practiced precision. Only then did he turn back toward the vehicle. He extended one hand respectfully, and my father stepped out. William Harrison moved with effortless authority, the kind of authority that couldn't be purchased, couldn't be imitated, and never needed to announce itself. A charcoal overcoat rested over a custom midnight blue suit. Every movement was calm, measured, confident. He never glanced at Ethan's mansion, never admired the expensive cars parked in the driveway, never looked around to measure anyone else's status. Men like him didn't compare themselves to others. The world adjusted itself around them. He walked directly toward me, ignoring the puddles soaking his polished leather shoes. The security officer remained one step behind, keeping the umbrella perfectly centered above him despite the driving rain. 10 years. It had been 10 years since I had last seen my father. I had walked away from everything he built because I wanted to prove something. I wanted to succeed on my own. I wanted someone to love me because of my character, not because of my family's fortune. Standing there in the storm, I finally understood how naive I had been. My father stopped 2 feet in front of me. The umbrella immediately shielded me from the rain. Warmth replaced the freezing wind. He didn't say a word. He didn't look toward the mansion. He didn't acknowledge Ethan or Marcus. He looked only at me. His eyes moved slowly over my soaked clothes, my trembling shoulders, my bare feet standing on the freezing pavement. Then, he saw my face, the bruise spreading across my cheekbone, the cut on my lip. Everything changed. The air beneath the umbrella seemed to grow colder. I watched the muscles tighten along my father's jaw. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't curse. He didn't ask what had happened, but the fury radiating from him was so overwhelming that even the security officer beside him instinctively straightened his posture. For the first time in years, I saw the man the financial world feared, and I knew someone's life was about to change forever. William Harrison was a man who dismantled multinational corporations before most people finished breakfast. Seeing his only daughter bruised was one of the few things capable of pushing him beyond the limits of his legendary self-control. Yet he didn't raise his voice. He didn't march toward the house. He didn't threaten anyone. Instead, he quietly unbuttoned his cashmere overcoat, slipped it from his shoulders, stepped closer, and gently wrapped it around me. The coat carried the familiar scent of cedar and expensive cologne. Its warmth instantly blocked the bitter wind. He pulled the lapels together across my chest, covering both me and the leather duffel bag hanging from my shoulder. Then he lifted one hand, carefully brushed a wet strand of hair away from the uninjured side of my face. "Get in the car, sweetheart." His voice was calm, steady, final. Their game is over. From the front porch, Ethan burst into mocking laughter. He still believed he controlled the situation. Stepping to the top of the stairs, he cupped his hands around his mouth. "So who's this, Claire?" His voice dripped with contempt. "What did you do?" Call some luxury car service to rescue you? You're going to need a lot more than a fancy ride to stop what we're filing tomorrow morning." Only then did my father lift his eyes. He looked directly at Ethan. He didn't answer. He didn't threaten him. He simply stared. The look wasn't angry. It wasn't emotional. It was the expression someone gives an insect crawling across the floor. Pure, absolute disgust. The silence was devastating. Ethan's smile faded. Almost unconsciously, he took one small step backward. Marcus straightened immediately. For the first time all evening, the attorney's confidence faltered. He recognized power when he saw it. My father rested one hand gently against my back, guiding me toward the open escalade. I climbed inside. The leather seats were warm, dry, safe. A moment later, he joined me. The security officer closed the armored door. The storm vanished. The cabin became perfectly silent. No commands were given. None were necessary. The convoy pulled away in flawless formation. Through the tinted glass, I watched Ethan and Marcus grow smaller with every passing second. They stood on the porch of the house I had spent 10 years restoring. Tiny figures, barely visible through the rain. They thought they had won. They believed they had taken everything from me. Back at the house, Ethan shook his head dismissively. "Pathetic," he laughed quietly. "She probably convinced some executive car service to let her ride on credit." "It doesn't matter. The agreement still stands. By tomorrow morning, she's bankrupt. Come on. Let's finish that bourbon." Marcus didn't move. He continued staring down the empty street. Something about the convoy bothered him. Its timing, its discipline, its precision. His instincts refused to let it go. Suddenly, his phone vibrated. Not a normal notification, an emergency banking alert. He immediately opened it. His eyes raced across the screen. Every trace of color disappeared from his face. Ethan frowned. "What is it?" Marcus swallowed. His voice barely worked. "Someone just attempted a massive draw against the firm's primary credit facility. It was blocked immediately." He looked back down at the screen. "Our operating liquidity." His voice cracked. "It's been frozen." Inside the Escalade, none of that chaos reached us. The armored cabin insulated us from both the storm and the panic beginning behind us. My father remained silent throughout the drive. He looked straight ahead, calm, unshakable. I pulled his coat tighter around myself and held my duffel bag close. The convoy left the wealthy suburbs behind. Towering office buildings soon surrounded us. We entered the financial district. The vehicles descended into a heavily secured underground garage. Steel security gates closed behind us, locking the outside world away. A private elevator carried us upward, 60 floors, without making a sound. When the doors opened, we stepped into my father's penthouse. It occupied the entire top floor of the skyscraper. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the storm sweeping across the city. Dark slate floors, rare obsidian accents, minimalist furnishings. Every detail reflected quiet authority instead of excess. Several members of the household staff were already waiting. They had been notified the moment the motorcade picked me up. One woman gently led me into a guest suite. She took my soaked clothes, then handed me a thick robe, fresh tailored trousers, and a silk blouse. The dry clothing felt like armor after the freezing rain. When I returned to the main living room, a steaming cup of Earl Grey waited on the glass coffee table. Beside it stood a physician carrying a medical case. My father planned for everything, even this. The doctor spoke very little. He carefully examined my jaw, checked for fractures, applied a cooling medical gel across the bruise on my cheek. Within minutes, the burning pain eased into a dull ache. Satisfied, he packed his equipment, nodded once to my father, then quietly left. I walked toward the enormous windows overlooking the city. Lightning flashed between distant skyscrapers. Holding the warm teacup in both hands, I slowly felt life returning to my fingers. My father approached. A crystal glass of scotch rested loosely in one hand. He didn't look outside. He watched my reflection in the glass. 10 years, Claire. His deep voice broke the silence. 10 years pretending to live a life beneath you. You walked away from your place on the board. You dismissed your security team. You even abandoned your own name. I turned toward him. I wanted something real. My voice remained calm. I wanted to build a life with my own hands. I wanted every success to belong to me. Not because people saw the Harrison name. I wanted a man who loved my mind, my character, not the fortune attached to my family. He took another slow sip of scotch, never looking away. And did you find him? Did your experiment work? The question hurt because I already knew the answer. Everything I believed had collapsed. Ethan hadn't loved me. He had loved having someone he believed was beneath him. Someone he could control, someone useful. The moment I stopped serving that purpose, his affection became violence. His gratitude became theft. He stole the money I had earned restoring forgotten buildings with my own hands. I lowered my eyes. No. My voice barely rose above a whisper. I was wrong. They didn't want a partner. They wanted a prop. And when I stopped playing that role, they threw me into the rain and tried to steal everything I'd built. My father quietly placed his glass onto the table. The crystal clicked softly against the glass surface. He walked toward me, stopped directly in front of me, placed both hands firmly on my shoulders. His eyes burned with quiet determination. You're a Harrison. His voice was unwavering. We do not tolerate disrespect. And we never allow thieves to keep what belongs to us. We don't simply survive. My father's voice was calm, controlled. But survival is for ordinary people. He looked directly into my eyes. We conquer. He stepped away and picked up a sleek silver iPad resting on his desk. Returning, he placed it in my hands. You tried living life your way, Claire. A faint smile crossed his face. Now we'll do it mine. The screen displayed a live internal financial dashboard. This wasn't market data. It wasn't a public trading platform. It was a proprietary intelligence feed monitoring the real-time liquidity of Charles Caldwell's investment firm. Almost everything on the screen was red. I began scrolling. Balance sheets, debt exposure, hidden liabilities, cash flow projections. The deeper I looked, the uglier the truth became. Ethan and Marcus had been desperately moving money through a maze of shell companies, trying to hide catastrophic losses. The $200,000 I had wired them barely registered. It had been nothing more than a single drop poured into an ocean of debt. Their commercial real estate positions were dangerously overleveraged. Margin calls were arriving almost hourly. The fund was bleeding cash at a pace that couldn't continue much longer. My father watched me quietly. He understood exactly what I was thinking. I wasn't interested in revenge. I didn't want Ethan humiliated in some childish act of retaliation. And I certainly didn't want my father writing a check to make the problem disappear. I wanted something else. I wanted the empire they worshipped to collapse under the weight of its own lies, brick by brick, until nothing remained except the truth. "We can destroy them before the markets open," my father said. His tone was clinical. "One call to the regulators. The firm is shut down. Marcus loses his license. By tomorrow morning, they're finished." I slowly shook my head, still studying the red lines flowing across the screen. "No. If we attack from the outside, they'll call themselves victims. They'll blame a hostile takeover. They'll rewrite history." I finally looked up. "I want something better. I want them to discover they built their own execution." For the first time that night, my father smiled. It wasn't warm. It wasn't comforting. It was the smile of someone who appreciated strategic thinking. He reached into his jacket, removed a heavy silver fountain pen, then placed it beside a leather-bound contract waiting on the desk. "It's time." He looked at me steadily. "The position of Executive Vice President of Acquisitions has remained vacant for 3 years. I've been saving it for you." He slid the contract closer. "Sign it. Become what you were born to be." I didn't hesitate. I picked up the pen. It felt solid, substantial. Nothing like the cheap plastic pen Marcus had tried forcing into my hand only hours earlier. I signed my full legal name, Claire Harrison. When I finished, my father quietly closed the contract, locked it inside his desk, then looked back at me. "Good." His voice carried absolute confidence. "Now show me. How do you intend to dismantle this family?" I reopened the financial dashboard, ignoring the standard performance metrics. Instead, I dove directly into the firm's hard assets. Within minutes, one project stood out: a massive mixed-use commercial development in the city's expanding technology district. Luxury offices, high-end retail, hundreds of millions invested. I tapped the screen. "This project." My father leaned closer. 6 months ago, Ethan proudly presented this development during a family dinner. He called it the project that would secure the Caldwell legacy. I reviewed the engineering reports, the architectural drawings, the geotechnical surveys. I warned him. I zoomed into one section of the report. The primary structure sits above an unstable underground water table. I told him the remediation costs alone could destroy the project's profitability before construction even reached the first floor. My father studied the numbers. "And he ignored you." I nodded. "He said I was just a restoration contractor. He told me I didn't understand high-level finance. He trusted his consultants instead." I opened the latest construction reports. They were wrong. The foundation work alone has exceeded budget by $60 million. They leveraged nearly the entire family investment fund against this single project. When the margin calls began, they started diverting client money. That's why they stole mine. They've been trying to plug the leak in a sinking ship. A faint spark appeared in my father's eyes. They violated their fiduciary obligations. A textbook mistake. He folded his arms. "But how does that help us?" I smiled, then opened the financing schedule. "Because they've run out of time." I pointed to one line. "The construction loan carries a balloon payment. It comes due in 5 days." If they fail to refinance, the bank forecloses. The development collapses. And because Marcus tied virtually every major asset together through cross-collateralization clauses, the entire investment firm falls with it. I looked directly at my father. They're desperate. They need $150 million immediately. Without it, they're bankrupt. My father leaned against the desk. And who's considering this rescue? I turned the iPad toward him. His own corporate intelligence team had already intercepted the communications. Dozens of increasingly urgent emails, repeated meeting requests, phone calls, every one of them directed to a single private equity investor, the only organization large enough to save them. They're asking us. I spoke almost in disbelief. Ethan and Charles have spent days begging Harrison Global for a $150 million bailout. They have absolutely no idea. The woman they threw into the rain last night is now the executive responsible for deciding whether they survive. The following morning, the reality of my new position finally settled in. I was no longer the quiet daughter-in-law desperately trying to earn acceptance from people who would never respect me. I was Claire Harrison, Executive Vice President of Acquisitions, and behind me stood the full power of one of the world's largest financial empires. While I spent the morning untangling the web of deception Ethan and Marcus had built, my former family was busy writing a completely different story. Still convinced they had destroyed me, Vivian and Olivia launched a carefully coordinated campaign throughout their exclusive social circles. They intended to erase my reputation, long before anyone learned who I truly was. The smear campaign began before noon. I had intentionally kept my old phone active, not because I expected an apology, but because I wanted to watch them. One notification after another appeared on the screen. Forwarded messages, screenshots, private conversations. Former acquaintances quietly sent me everything. Vivian wasted no time. She understood that reputation could be just as powerful as money. That morning, she hosted one of her regular charity luncheons at Oak Ridge Country Club. According to everyone who contacted me, she performed beautifully. The grieving, heartbroken, betrayed mother-in-law. She dabbed at her eyes with an embroidered handkerchief, paused dramatically between sentences, and carefully constructed a story that made me the villain. She claimed I had spent years secretly stealing money from Ethan, that I had hidden the funds in offshore accounts, that my modest background had been nothing more than an elaborate performance designed to trap her son. By the time dessert was served, half the room believed every word. Olivia eagerly added fuel to the fire. She delighted in embellishing the story. Anyone willing to listen heard the same version. The fleet of black Escalades that collected me after the gala, according to Olivia, belonged to an older millionaire with whom I had supposedly been having an affair. She claimed I had abandoned my marriage the moment my financial crimes were exposed. The lies were astonishing. Yet inside their insulated social circle, they spread effortlessly. They counted on one thing: my silence. They assumed I was too humiliated, too powerless, too poor to defend myself. But the gossip was only one front of the attack. Ethan wanted something far more damaging. He wanted to destroy my career. My restoration business hadn't been built overnight. It represented 10 years of painstaking work. Historic buildings, preservation commissions, architects, engineers, local officials, relationships earned project by project. Ethan decided to use every connection his family possessed. He personally contacted the chairman of several state preservation boards. Some owed his family financial favors. Others depended on Caldwell Capital for investment management. By early afternoon, the first email arrived. My consulting agreement for a major downtown restoration project had been terminated. The official explanation cited administrative restructuring. An hour later, 2 more notices followed. Additional preservation boards suspended my participation in upcoming evaluations indefinitely. Within a single afternoon, Ethan had effectively blacklisted me from nearly every significant source of professional income. He intended to make rebuilding impossible. Then came one final message. My phone vibrated, a text from Ethan. Attached was a screenshot confirming one of my terminated contracts. Below it, only one sentence. I told you you'd end up back in the gutter. You're finished in this city. He genuinely believed he had won. He imagined himself removing every piece from my side of the chessboard. I stared at the message for several seconds, not with anger, with curiosity. He still had absolutely no idea who he was playing against. While he manipulated local preservation boards, I was sitting inside one of the most powerful financial institutions in the world. His attempt to intimidate me accomplished only one thing. It strengthened my resolve. I never answered. Silence was infinitely more unsettling than any insult. I placed the phone face down on my mahogany desk inside my new office at Harrison Global, then returned to work. The silver iPad displayed every significant asset connected to the Caldwell family. One report immediately caught my attention. Vivian. According to our intelligence division, nearly all of her social influence revolved around one position: president of Oak Ridge Country Club. The same club where she hosted the anniversary gala. The same club where she had spent the morning poisoning my reputation. Like many exclusive private clubs, Oak Ridge depended on financing. Its recent clubhouse renovation had been funded through a substantial commercial credit facility. I opened the debt structure. The original bank had already syndicated the loan. The debt now formed part of a larger commercial portfolio owned by another financial institution. Perfect. I pressed the intercom. Our acquisitions team, please. Within seconds, the call connected. Acquire the entire portfolio containing Oak Ridge Country Club's credit facility. No hesitation, no discussion. The transaction began immediately. 20 minutes later, it was complete. Harrison Global now owned the debt, which meant we controlled the financial future of Oak Ridge Country Club. I allowed myself the faintest smile. Vivian believed she ruled that club. She had no idea. I now owned the ground beneath her feet. Satisfied, I closed the Oak Ridge file. That was merely a distraction. The real objective remained unchanged: destroying Caldwell Capital. I left my office, walked through the glass executive corridor, and entered Harrison Global's Secure Financial Operations Center. The room resembled a military command post: rows of illuminated servers, wall-sized market displays, live financial feeds from every major exchange in the world. 5 senior forensic accountants were already waiting. My father had assigned his best people. I took my seat at the head of the obsidian conference table. David, the lead forensic accountant, projected a complex network of transactions across the main display. Every movement connected to the $150 million bailout request Ethan and Marcus had submitted. David spoke quietly. Any applicant requesting financing of this size must demonstrate substantial unencumbered capital. Ethan's firm suddenly reported a significant liquidity increase over the last 48 hours. I nodded. Trace every dollar. The room immediately went to work. Sophisticated forensic software peeled away one corporate layer after another. Shell companies disappeared. Holding entities vanished. Artificial transactions unraveled in real time. Marcus believed he had hidden everything behind provincial legal structures. He never imagined his work would be examined by an institution with direct access to international banking intelligence. One by one, offshore accounts appeared on the display. Among them, the Cayman Islands Trust, the very trust Marcus had proudly used to threaten me. David continued tracing the movement of funds. The money hadn't remained offshore. It had quietly returned through multiple intermediary entities, layered, repackaged, then deposited into Caldwell Capital's operating accounts as supposedly legitimate liquidity. Another analyst compared those deposits against the firm's client records. Within seconds, the screen erupted with flashing red warnings. Every conversation stopped. No one spoke. Because the evidence sitting in front of us revealed something far worse than fraud. It revealed a crime that would bring down far more than a single investment firm. The room remained silent. No one needed to explain what we were looking at. The evidence spoke for itself. Marcus hadn't simply hidden the money he stole from me inside an offshore trust. He had gone much further. He had used those stolen funds to satisfy the liquidity requirements on Caldwell Capital's bailout application. He had crossed a line no competent attorney should ever approach. Marcus had deliberately commingled client assets. The forensic reports showed everything. Escrow accounts had been emptied. Funds belonging to elderly retirees had been quietly transferred. Money from a local teacher's pension fund had disappeared into the same web of transactions. Every dollar stolen from my restoration company had been added to the pile. Then, those stolen assets had been presented as Ethan's unrestricted personal capital. I stared at the glowing network of red lines connecting innocent clients directly to the fraudulent balance sheet. The arrogance was unbelievable. Marcus hadn't merely bent the law, he had shattered it. Wire fraud, securities fraud, false financial disclosures. Each offense alone carried devastating consequences. Together, they represented a federal criminal case. David quietly slid a thick printed report across the table. He already knew what I was thinking. This isn't a civil matter anymore, Claire. His tone was steady. They've committed serious federal crimes. If this package reaches the regulators today, the FBI will probably be inside their offices tomorrow. I picked up the report. Its weight felt almost symbolic. Only 24 hours earlier, Ethan had laughed while telling me I couldn't afford to fight him. Marcus had promised to bury me beneath endless lawsuits. They believed their intelligence made them untouchable. Instead, they had personally created the evidence that would destroy them. Inside my hand sat everything required to end Marcus's legal career forever. Everything necessary to send Ethan to federal prison. Everything capable of reducing Charles Caldwell's carefully cultivated reputation to nothing more than a criminal scandal. Complete destruction, bound neatly inside a single report. But handing the evidence directly to federal authorities felt too easy, too impersonal. I didn't want them arrested without understanding why. I wanted them to walk willingly into the trap. I wanted them to look directly at the woman they had insulted, assaulted, thrown into the rain, and finally understand she had engineered every step of their downfall. I placed the report back onto the polished obsidian table, then looked toward David. Secure everything, but don't release it. He frowned slightly. For how long? 24 hours. He nodded once, without asking another question. I reached for my encrypted corporate phone, opened Harrison Global's executive scheduling system. There it was. Caldwell Capital's emergency bailout application, marked urgent, requesting immediate review. Instead of allowing the standard approval process to continue, I overrode it. personally, then drafted a formal executive response. Congratulations! Your application has successfully passed our preliminary liquidity review. You are invited to Harrison Global Headquarters tomorrow at 9 a.m. for final negotiations regarding a $150 million capital investment. I read the message one final time, then pressed send. The trap was officially in motion. Tomorrow morning, they would willingly walk through the front doors of Harrison Global and straight into the collapse of everything they believed they controlled. At precisely 4 o'clock that afternoon, Marcus's secure corporate inbox chimed. The subject line was brief. Harrison Global, Capital Investment Final Review. He opened the email immediately. His eyes widened. This wasn't an automated response. It hadn't come from a junior analyst. The invitation had been issued directly from Harrison Global's Executive Acquisitions Office. He printed the message, walked quickly down the hallway, ignored Charles's office, and entered Ethan's suite without knocking. The single page landed on Ethan's desk. He read it once, then again. Color immediately returned to his face. The anxiety he'd carried all morning disappeared. He smiled, then laughed. We did it! He leaned back comfortably in his leather chair. My father was right. Project Confidence. And the market follows. Marcus quietly walked to the office bar. He poured 2 glasses of 20-year-old scotch. Handing one to Ethan, he shook his head. It wasn't confidence. It was sophisticated legal structuring. We isolated every vulnerability, presented flawless financials, and convinced Harrison Global. A rare smile crossed his face. We outplayed them. Their glasses touched. Ethan raised his in celebration. To superior bloodlines. The same arrogant toast Charles had made at the gala. And, he smirked, to my soon-to-be ex-wife disappearing forever. He looked toward Marcus. Have you heard anything from Claire? Marcus slowly sipped his scotch. Not a word. She's probably sitting alone in some budget motel. Without money. Without contracts. Without options. She has no leverage left. We've neutralized her completely. Ethan laughed again. Walking to the humidor, he selected 2 premium Cuban cigars. Lighting his own, he exhaled slowly. It's almost embarrassing. He shook his head. She actually believed wiring a couple $100,000 gave her influence. He smiled through the smoke. She never understood. In our world, $150 million is nothing more than a signature. While Ethan and Marcus celebrated with expensive scotch and cigars, Olivia celebrated in her own way. Marcus had already texted her. The bailout meeting had been confirmed. As far as she knew, their financial problems were over. Confident that Harrison Global's money was already theirs, she decided she deserved a reward. Ignoring her nearly maxed-out personal credit cards, she reached for the firm's executive corporate card instead, then drove straight to the city's most exclusive jewelry boutique. She didn't browse the displays. She didn't ask about prices. She simply walked through the showroom, pointed toward the largest diamond collection, and said, I'll take that one. Olivia didn't hesitate. She pointed. I'll take that bracelet. And the matching one. That sapphire necklace. She glanced toward the display case. And that limited edition watch for Marcus. The boutique manager paused as the total continued climbing. When it finally appeared on the screen, it approached $500,000. Olivia didn't even ask the price. She simply removed the firm's executive corporate card from her designer handbag, set it on the glass counter. Run it. Her voice carried effortless entitlement. And have everything delivered to my house tonight. The transaction processed immediately. Approved. The firm's artificially inflated credit facilities absorbed the charge without resistance. Olivia walked out of the boutique feeling unstoppable. She never imagined that the very account she had just used was already under active forensic review. Back at Caldwell Capital, Marcus returned to his office wearing the relaxed confidence of someone convinced he had beaten the system. The Harrison Global meeting was confirmed. The bailout was all but secured. Only one loose end remained. Me. He picked up his phone, dialed the number he had spent days ensuring could no longer access a single personal asset. The call went directly to voicemail, exactly as he expected. He waited for the tone, then smiled. Claire. His voice settled into its familiar, intimidating cadence. I'm calling to notify you that the divorce petition has now been formally filed. Since you failed to respond and have retained no legal counsel, we'll be requesting a default judgment. He paused, enjoying every second. Your preservation contracts have already been reassigned. Your professional reputation in this city is over. My advice remains the same. Accept the $5,000 settlement. Leave the state. If you challenge this divorce or contact this family again, I'll make sure you're personally responsible for every dollar of our legal fees. He laughed quietly. You played a very foolish game, Claire. And you lost everything. The voicemail ended. Marcus tossed his phone onto the desk, checked the time. 5:30. He gathered his briefcase. Tomorrow morning, Harrison Global would save the firm. Or so he believed. 10 miles away, high above the city, I stood inside my office at Harrison Global. The storm had disappeared overnight. Sunlight reflected from the glass towers stretching across downtown. I wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. The faint bruise beneath my makeup remained almost invisible. The anger beneath it didn't. I listened to Marcus's voicemail from beginning to end. Every threat, every insult, every arrogant assumption. He truly believed I was defeated. When the recording finished, I quietly placed my phone face down on my desk, then pressed the intercom. David? The response came immediately. Yes, Ms. Harrison. The audit is complete. I continued looking out over the skyline, then spoke only one sentence. Freeze every corporate account. A brief pause. Effective 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Every account? Every one. Understood. The following morning, Vivian and Olivia woke believing their future had been secured. The bailout meeting was scheduled for 9. As far as they knew, their financial problems were over. They decided to celebrate. At exactly 8:45 a.m., they entered the city's most exclusive luxury boutique. Italian marble floors, crystal lighting, private fitting salons. The manager, Francois, immediately recognized them. He hurried forward professionals. Sparkling water appeared. Sales associates gathered. The boutique effectively closed around them. Olivia wasted no time. 3 limited edition handbags, 5 pairs of runway shoes, an embroidered couture evening gown. Vivian selected vintage silk scarves, diamond accessories, and several custom evening pieces. They laughed loudly while shopping, making certain everyone nearby overheard them. Ethan closed the deal. Our family fund is stronger than ever. The future has never looked brighter. Across the city, the clock reached exactly 9 a.m. Inside Harrison Global, David executed the order. Every linked corporate account froze simultaneously. Operating accounts, escrow accounts, credit facilities, offshore structures. Every line of liquidity Marcus had illegally assembled stopped instantly. At 9:05, Vivian and Olivia approached the checkout counter. Their purchases totaled just over $120,000. Olivia casually placed the platinum corporate card on the counter. She never even looked at the total. Francois inserted the card, waited. Instead of approval, the terminal emitted a loud electronic beep. Declined. He frowned politely. "My apologies, madam. Perhaps a connection issue." He wiped the chip carefully, tried again. Another beep. Declined. Olivia rolled her eyes. "It's obviously fraud protection. The amount is large. Run it manually." Francois checked the terminal again. "I'm afraid I can't override this. The issuing bank is instructing us to retain the card." Vivian immediately stepped forward. "That's absurd." She snatched the card from his hand. "Your system is malfunctioning." She reached into her handbag, produced her own black executive card. "Use mine." "This account has no limits." Francois accepted it, inserted the card. A third electronic tone echoed across the boutique. Declined. Silence. Francois slowly removed the card, placed it carefully back on the counter, then stepped back. His professional smile disappeared. "I'm very sorry, ladies." His voice carried clearly through the showroom. "Both of your primary accounts have been declined by your financial institutions. If you have another form of payment, I'd be happy to assist." The boutique fell silent. Nearby shoppers stopped browsing. Conversations faded. Heads turned. Inside their social world, few things were more humiliating than a declined luxury card. Vivian's face drained of color. Her hand shook as she snatched the black card from the counter. For the very first time that morning, she realized something was terribly, terribly wrong. "This is ridiculous." Vivian kept her voice low, desperate not to attract even more attention. "Charles is meeting with Harrison Global right now. I'll call him. He'll fix this immediately." She pulled out her phone and dialed her husband's private number. The call rang, and rang again, then rolled to voicemail. Charles was already inside Harrison Global's executive boardroom, completely isolated from the outside world. A wave of uneasiness washed over Olivia. She immediately called Marcus. He answered on the second ring while crossing the marble lobby of his law firm. "What is it?" His tone carried mild irritation. "Marcus, fix the accounts right now." Her composure had vanished. "My platinum card was declined. So was Vivian's. Call the bank. Remove the fraud hold." Marcus stopped walking. Without another word, he opened the firm's secure banking application. He expected to see a temporary security restriction. Instead, every account was marked in bright red. Account frozen, suspicious activity, pending investor review. Marcus stared at the screen, unable to process what he was seeing. Olivia kept talking, almost shouting, but her voice faded into meaningless background noise. He ended the call without answering. The lobby suddenly felt much colder. This wasn't a routine fraud alert. The wording told him exactly what had happened. Institutional intervention. Someone with enormous financial authority had frozen everything, every operating account, every trust, every credit facility. Marcus forced himself to breathe. Years of courtroom experience kept the panic from reaching his face. He slipped the phone back into his pocket, straightened his cuffs, adjusted his jacket. He only needed to reach his office, access the secure terminal, activate one of the emergency override protocols. He took one step, then stopped. Something was wrong. The lobby was silent. Normally, it buzzed with assistants, attorneys, and clients. Now, no one moved. He looked toward reception. His executive secretary stood frozen behind the mahogany desk. She clutched several thick folders against her chest. Every trace of color had disappeared from her face. She wasn't looking at the paperwork. She was looking at him, with fear. Before Marcus could speak, 3 men rose simultaneously from the waiting area. They weren't corporate clients. Their inexpensive gray suits were practical rather than fashionable. Their shoes were ordinary. Everything about them suggested government service instead of private wealth. They approached with disciplined precision. The man in front stopped directly before Marcus. Without offering a handshake, he removed a leather credential wallet, opened it, displayed a silver federal badge. "We're forensic investigators acting on behalf of the Securities and Exchange Commission." His voice echoed through the silent lobby. "We've received documented evidence concerning significant financial irregularities connected to this firm. We're executing an emergency audit. You are instructed to surrender administrative access to all digital systems. Do not access your workstation. Do not remove documents. Do not destroy evidence." He paused, then delivered the sentence Marcus feared most. "This firm is now under federal investigation." The words struck harder than any courtroom verdict. Marcus felt his heartbeat pounding against his ribs. The confidence he had carefully maintained collapsed. He had believed the offshore structures would protect him, that the shell companies, trusts, and layered transactions would never be unraveled. But federal investigators were standing in his lobby, which meant someone had already provided them with the roadmap. Every transaction, every transfer, every hidden account. The truth hit him all at once. The money stolen from Claire, the Cayman Trust, the fabricated liquidity statements. Everything was exposed. His carefully engineered strategy had become overwhelming evidence. Wire fraud, false financial disclosures, misappropriated client assets. Every decision he believed demonstrated brilliance now pointed directly toward prison. He knew exactly what came next. His law license? Gone. His reputation? Destroyed. His career? Finished. The lead investigator stepped closer, holding out a thick packet of federal warrants. "We need the encryption keys for every escrow account." His tone left no room for negotiation. Immediately. He looked Marcus directly in the eye. "We already have teams securing your partner's investment offices." "No records leave this building." Marcus's legs suddenly felt weak. For the first time in his professional life, he had no legal argument, no loophole, no escape. Only one thought remained. Warn Ethan. The Harrison Global meeting wasn't a rescue. It was a trap. He pulled out his phone with trembling hands, ignored the shaking in his fingers, pressed Ethan's speed dial contact. The phone rang, 10 miles away. Ethan Caldwell walked confidently through the glass entrance of Harrison Global headquarters. His phone vibrated inside his jacket. He glanced at the screen. Marcus. He smiled to himself. Probably another unnecessary update, or perhaps Olivia complaining about shopping. Without another thought, he ignored the call. Security escorted him toward the executive elevators. The polished steel doors opened. Charles stepped inside beside him. The doors quietly closed. Within seconds, their phones lost signal. Marcus's warning disappeared into silence. The elevator climbed, higher, higher. Carrying father and son toward the 60th floor, neither man realized they were ascending into the place where everything they had built would come to an end. When the elevator doors finally opened, they stepped into another world. The executive level of Harrison Global wasn't designed to impress. It was designed to dominate. Towering ceilings, dark obsidian walls, floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking the financial district far below. No paintings, no decorative displays, no unnecessary luxury. Every detail projected precision, authority, control. Even the silence felt expensive. Ethan instinctively adjusted his silk tie. For reasons he couldn't explain, a small knot formed in his stomach. It was the first crack in the confidence that had carried him all morning, and it would only grow larger. Before either man could speak again, I calmly took my seat. The high-backed executive chair faced the entire room like a throne. The 5 attorneys remained standing behind me. Not one of them spoke. Not one of them looked away. The silence was deliberate. It forced Ethan and Charles to keep staring at me. I folded my hands neatly on the petrified wood table, then looked directly at them. "Good morning, gentlemen." My voice was perfectly composed. "Thank you for coming." Charles blinked. His face twisted with disbelief. "This," he laughed nervously. "This isn't funny." He looked toward the attorneys. "There seems to be some misunderstanding." Turning back to me, he pointed an accusing finger. "She's my daughter-in-law. My son's estranged wife. What is she doing sitting there?" One of the attorneys answered before I could. "Miss Harrison is Executive Vice President of Acquisitions." His voice was crisp. "And chair of today's review committee." The room fell completely still. Charles frowned. "No." He shook his head. "That's impossible." Ethan let out a short laugh. "I know exactly who she is. She restores old buildings. She barely had enough money to pay contractors. Someone needs to explain this joke." I simply watched them. Neither man noticed that none of the attorneys smiled. None of them corrected me. None of them questioned my authority. Instead, every person in the room waited for me to speak. I slowly opened the leather folder resting before me. "My name," I looked directly into Ethan's eyes, "is Claire Harrison. I am Executive Vice President of Acquisitions for Harrison Global. I have final authority over every transaction exceeding $50 million. I paused. "Which includes your request for $150 million. Ethan stared at me. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Charles looked from me to the attorneys, back to me again. "No," he whispered. "That's impossible." "You told us your father owned a construction company." "I told you my father worked in construction." I kept my expression neutral. "I never told you which company." Understanding slowly spread across Ethan's face. His skin turned pale. The anniversary dinner, the black Escalades, the security team, the effortless confidence, every memory returned at once. He finally understood. The woman he had mocked for 10 years, the woman he had thrown into the rain, the woman he had slapped, was the daughter of one of the most powerful financiers in the country. His breathing became shallow. Charles attempted one last smile, a weak, desperate one. "Claire." I'm sure this has all been a misunderstanding. We're family. I met his eyes. No. We were. The lead attorney slid a thick folder across the table. It stopped directly in front of Ethan. He looked down. The cover bore only one sentence. Forensic Financial Review, Caldwell Capital. His hands hesitated before opening it. Inside, page after page, transaction after transaction, wire transfers, escrow withdrawals, client accounts, offshore trusts. Every illegal movement of money had been mapped in meticulous detail. Marcus's name appeared repeatedly. So did Ethan's. Charles reached over Ethan's shoulder. The color drained from his face. What is this? His voice barely existed anymore. This, I answered calmly, is the reason your bailout meeting has been canceled. Ethan looked up. You can't do this. I already have. I pressed a small button built into the conference table. The massive display wall behind me came alive. Graphs, bank records, corporate structures, every hidden transaction appeared on the screen. The lead attorney spoke. Harrison Global completed an independent forensic review of your submitted financial statements. We identified material misrepresentations, commingled client funds, fraudulent liquidity disclosures, and evidence suggesting federal financial crimes. Ethan pushed himself to his feet. This is ridiculous. Marcus handled the legal work. He assured us everything was compliant. I leaned forward slightly. So you signed documents? Without reading them? He froze. His own answer trapped him. Charles slammed both hands onto the table. You set us up! I calmly shook my head. No, you did. You built this. You signed it. You submitted it. We simply verified it. The room became unbearably quiet. Then, my phone vibrated. I glanced at the screen. A single message from David. All corporate accounts successfully frozen. Federal investigators are now executing coordinated actions. I locked the phone without another glance, then looked back at Ethan. The meeting is over. No investment will be made. And gentlemen, I allowed myself the smallest smile. Your problems are only beginning. You stole from retired teachers. My voice never changed. You stole from elderly investors who trusted your family with their life savings. You stole from business owners. And when that wasn't enough, you stole from me. The conference room remained perfectly silent. Neither Ethan nor Charles could look away. I spent 10 years restoring buildings everyone else abandoned. I worked in freezing winters, scorching summers. I earned every dollar. And you treated that money as if it already belonged to you. I slowly closed the file. The sound echoed through the room. You never believed I deserved respect. You believed I deserved gratitude for being allowed to stand beside you. Ethan lowered his head. His breathing had become uneven. I continued. The irony is extraordinary. You spent years convincing me I wasn't good enough for your family. But today, your family is begging mine to survive. Charles suddenly leaned forward. His voice shook. Claire, we made mistakes. I admit that. But we're businessmen. We can negotiate. We're prepared to return your money, with interest. We'll issue a public apology. We'll do whatever is necessary. I looked at him for several seconds, then quietly asked, So now my dignity has a price? Charles's mouth closed. He had no answer. Ethan finally found his voice. Claire. I'm sorry. The words sounded foreign coming from him. I lost my temper. I never should have hit you. I wasn't thinking. He swallowed hard. I'll spend the rest of my life making it right. For the first time since entering the room, I allowed myself a faint smile. Not one of forgiveness, one of disappointment. Yesterday, you watched me stand outside in the rain. You saw blood on my face. You listened while your mother called me a thief. Your sister called me worthless. Your lawyer threatened to destroy my life. You said nothing. I leaned forward. So tell me, Ethan, exactly when did you become sorry? Was it when you remembered I was your wife? Or... I gently tapped the business card lying on the table. When you discovered I was Claire Harrison? His face collapsed because he knew the answer. The apology wasn't born from regret, it was born from fear. I stood, slowly. The 5 attorneys behind me straightened in perfect unison. I looked first at Ethan, then Charles. For 10 years, I believed character mattered more than status. I was wrong. Status reveals character. When you believed I had nothing, you showed me exactly who you were. I picked up the forensic report. This isn't revenge. It's accountability. I handed the file to the lead attorney. He immediately placed it inside a locked evidence case. I nodded once. Release the evidence package. The attorney didn't hesitate. Immediately, Ms. Harrison. He stepped out of the boardroom carrying the case. Ethan's eyes widened. What does that mean? No one answered. Then, a sharp knock sounded on the glass door. The room turned. The door opened. 2 federal investigators entered. Dark suits, official credentials, calm expressions. The lead investigator looked directly at Ethan and Charles. Good morning. He held up a folder bearing the federal seal. We're here regarding an ongoing financial fraud investigation. We'll need both of you to remain available for questioning. Charles staggered backward. No, he whispered. No. Ethan looked at me. Pure panic filled his eyes. Claire, please, don't do this. For the first time that morning, I allowed emotion into my voice. Not anger, not hatred, just certainty. I didn't do this. You did. You forged the documents. You signed them. You stole the money. You chose every step that brought you here. I turned toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Behind me, I could hear Charles struggling to breathe, Ethan repeatedly trying to explain himself, federal investigators calmly beginning their work. None of it mattered anymore. The chapter that had consumed 10 years of my life was finally over. I looked out across the skyline, the same city where they once promised I would never work again. Now, every major building below stood as a reminder of something they had never understood. Real power isn't measured by wealth. It isn't inherited through a famous last name, and it certainly isn't maintained through fear. Real power belongs to the person who can lose everything, stand back up, and still choose justice over revenge. The heavy oak doors closed with a deep echoing thud. Silence settled over the boardroom. The kind of silence that only exists after everything has fallen apart. The attorneys quietly gathered their files. Federal investigators began coordinating with Harrison Global's compliance division. No one celebrated. No one applauded. Justice required no audience. I remained standing beside my father. Together, we watched through the floor-to-ceiling windows as 3 black government SUVs pulled away from the building. Inside them sat the people who had spent years believing they were untouchable. Now, their future belonged to federal prosecutors. My father broke the silence first. "Are you all right?" It wasn't the question of a billionaire. It was the question of a father. I looked out across the skyline. For a long moment, I didn't answer. Finally, I nodded. "I think I finally am." He rested a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "You never needed my money to prove your worth." "I know." I smiled softly. "I just needed to remember who I was." He returned the smile. "The board meeting starts in 20 minutes. "The market doesn't pause," I laughed quietly, for the first time in what felt like years. "I'll be there." My father left the room. One by one, the attorneys followed him. Soon, I was alone. I walked slowly toward the enormous windows overlooking the city. Somewhere below, historic buildings I had restored still stood proudly. Buildings everyone else believed were beyond saving. I suddenly realized they weren't so different from people. Some structures deserved restoration. Others had become too rotten at the foundation. No amount of paint could save them. You had to tear them down, so something stronger could rise in their place. A gentle knock interrupted my thoughts. David stepped inside. "The federal investigators have completed the initial seizure." He handed me a folder. "Caldwell Capital has officially filed for bankruptcy protection. Multiple civil lawsuits have already been submitted by former clients. The teacher's pension fund has recovered the frozen assets. Elderly investors will receive emergency reimbursement through court-appointed receivers." I opened the folder. Page after page confirmed the same truth. The innocent people had not lost everything. The stolen money would be returned. That mattered more than any revenge ever could. "Thank you, David." He nodded respectfully. "Congratulations, Miss Harrison." He quietly left. I looked once more at the empty boardroom. 48 hours earlier, I had stood alone in freezing rain with nothing except a duffel bag. Today, I stood here with everything they claimed I would never have. Not because of my family name, not because of wealth, but because truth survives longer than lies. Power built on deception always collapses. Power built on integrity endures. I picked up my briefcase, straightened my jacket, then walked confidently toward the boardroom doors. A new chapter wasn't beginning because my enemies had fallen. It was beginning because I no longer carried them with me. As the elevator descended toward the executive offices, my phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. It contained only one sentence. "I'm sorry for never believing you." There was no signature. There didn't need to be. I looked at the message for a moment, then quietly deleted it. Some apologies arrived too late. Some doors, once closed, should remain closed forever. I slipped the phone into my pocket. The elevator doors opened. Employees throughout the executive floor greeted me with quiet respect. "Good morning, Miss Harrison." I smiled politely and continued walking. Behind me, one story had ended. Ahead of me, my own life was finally beginning. The 5 corporate attorneys quietly gathered their files and left the boardroom, closing the doors behind them. Only my father and I remained inside the vast, glass-walled room. He walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked out across the city. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he turned to me. A rare, genuine smile softened the stern expression that had defined him for most of my life. "You handled that perfectly, Claire," he said quietly. You didn't simply survive what they did to you. You dismantled the entire foundation they built their lives on. And today, you proved exactly who you are. I lowered my eyes to the revised divorce decree resting on the petrified wood table. The signature line was still blank. It wouldn't stay that way for long. Oddly enough, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindictive. I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. The 10-year chapter of my life was finally over. Now, I could begin building the future that had always belonged to me. 6 months later, the first cool days of autumn had arrived. The air was crisp. Golden leaves drifted through the historic district as morning sunlight illuminated one of the city's oldest Victorian mansions. For more than 20 years, the building had been abandoned. Developers had written it off as a lost cause, too expensive, too damaged, too complicated. I saw something different. I personally financed every stage of its restoration through my private trust. Now, the mansion had been transformed into something far more valuable than luxury real estate. It had become a state-of-the-art transitional home for women escaping domestic violence and financial abuse. I stood on the wide stone steps wearing an emerald green tailored suit. My hair was neatly pulled back. The bruise from the country club gala had disappeared months ago. Only the lessons remained. The lawn below was filled with reporters, city officials, community leaders, donors, and dozens of women whose lives would soon be changed inside this building. They weren't here to watch another business acquisition. They were here to celebrate hope. For the first time in years, I wasn't hiding behind anyone. I stood completely in the light. The contrast between my life and the collapse of my former family couldn't have been greater. Marcus's legal career ended almost overnight. His law license was permanently revoked. Federal prosecutors charged him with multiple counts of wire fraud, securities fraud, and financial conspiracy. While waiting for trial, he accepted a low-level paralegal position at a small discount law office. The same man who once mocked everyone around him now spent his days organizing files and delivering coffee to attorneys he previously considered beneath him. Olivia and Vivian experienced their own reckoning. Their luxury homes were foreclosed. Their country club memberships were revoked. Their social circle disappeared almost instantly. Without access to stolen money or hidden accounts, they were forced to sell designer handbags, jewelry, couture dresses, and every symbol of the life they once flaunted. More than once, people recognized Vivian trying to negotiate higher resale prices for the very scarves and diamond accessories she had proudly purchased on the morning everything collapsed. Ethan's downfall was the hardest. He lost his house, his cars, his executive career, his reputation. The overwhelming debt tied to the fraudulent real estate ventures remained entirely his responsibility. Every major financial institution refused to work with him. The elite community he had spent years trying to impress wanted nothing to do with him anymore. The last update I heard, he was stocking shelves in the plumbing department of a suburban home improvement store, wearing an orange vest, helping customers find pipe fittings. The man who once believed he ruled the financial world had lost everything that status had given him. Back at the shelter, the mayor finished his remarks and turned toward me. The audience erupted into warm applause. Someone handed me a pair of oversized ceremonial gold scissors. As I smiled toward the crowd, my phone vibrated. I glanced at the screen. One message from my father. The foundation is strong. I'm proud of you. I read it twice. A quiet warmth settled in my chest. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, then looked around me. The cameras, the volunteers, the women standing together without fear. The historic home that had been rescued from destruction. I realized something. I wasn't standing here because I had defeated my enemies. I was standing here because I had finally stopped living for their approval. I stepped forward, lifted the scissors, and cut the ribbon. The crowd cheered, the doors opened. A new beginning had officially arrived. I was Claire Harrison, not because of the name I inherited, but because of the woman I chose to become. Claire's journey from a humiliated wife to the architect of her own future carries a lesson that reaches far beyond wealth or success. Never make yourself smaller just to fit into someone else's idea of who you should be. For years, Claire hid her influence, her accomplishments, and even her family background because she wanted to be loved for who she was instead of what she possessed. Instead of earning respect, she became an easy target for people who mistook kindness for weakness. Real confidence begins the moment we stop accepting the stories other people write about us. When Claire was publicly humiliated, financially betrayed, and physically assaulted, she didn't respond with reckless revenge. She responded with discipline, patience, preparation, and the quiet confidence of someone who understood that truth eventually defeats deception. Her greatest victory wasn't destroying a corrupt financial empire. It was reclaiming the identity she had abandoned in order to make other people comfortable. Healthy relationships are never built on fear, control, or constant sacrifice. They're built on mutual respect, trust, and recognizing each other's worth. If someone only values you when you become smaller, they never valued you in the first place. So take a moment to think about the people around you. And if you find yourself sitting at a table where your dignity is constantly questioned, have the courage to stand up, walk away, and build one where your worth is never up for debate.